Congratulations on making it to the end of the PHP section of the Complete Web Developer course. You've now covered a huge range of different programming structures and variable and array types, as well as doing some pretty advanced things like sending emails, including files, and getting the contents of other URLs. You should also be in a position that pretty much anything you wanted to know how to do in PHP, you could find out with a quick Google. So on that note, welcome to the PHP challenge. And this is it. We're going to create a What's the Weather web page where the user can put in the name of any city. So let's say Dubai, for example, and the weather for that city will be returned. So you can see it looks nice and pretty. We're obviously using Bootstrap here, and I've got a nice background image from Unsplash as well. We're also pretty neat if they put in an error, then we get a nice error message displaying as an alert as well. So you may be wondering, how are we getting the weather for all of these cities? They're not stored on our database or anything anywhere. So what we're doing is we're getting the contents of another website, and that is weather-forecast.com. And the reason I've chosen this particular site is that if we get the forecast for a particular city, you can see that the name of that city is put directly in the URL. So if we got the contents of this whole URL, as we know how to do, then hidden in there, we've got the weather summary, which is what we want. So what your code is going to need to do is get the contents of this URL and then extract this bit of text from it. Now that last bit we haven't quite done. We've done similar things, but not quite extracting text from within a string. So you're going to need to do a little bit of Googling there to figure out how that's done. Or of course, if you have problems, you can watch me do it. One word of warning before I set you off. Although this is a great challenge for practicing all that we've used in PHP, it's not a great use case for a real live production website for two main reasons. First off, you're dependent on weather-forecast.com not only remaining live, but remaining in the same format that it does now. If they were to change their code or change the layout of their page, that would likely break your page. So that's not a great system for a live and popular website. Secondly, if your website does become popular, then weather-forecast.com will not be happy with you because you're essentially taking their data and then displaying it to the user without giving any credits to weather-forecast.com themselves. So they may well block your website if it gets too popular. So it's a good thing to practice, and it can be very useful in other ways if you want to get a large amount of data from a web page, for example. That's known as scraping, and they use very similar techniques as to what we're going to do in this challenge. But if you did want to create something like a weather site, you're much better off using what's known as an API, which is set up for this sort of site, and we'll look at in a couple of sections' time. All right. So that's it. This is what you're creating. Best of luck, and I hope it goes well. Go for it. All right then, here we go. So I'm going to start by setting up my user interface, and I'll do that, of course, by searching for Bootstrap 4. And then I'm going to get the template set up. Okay, so download Bootstrap, and then getting started, scroll down, and here it is. Remember, that might be in a slightly different place on the Bootstrap website for you. Okay, lovely. Let's have a look. We've got our bootstrapped Hello World. Fantastic. So let's just pop in a title this time. Because it's always good to have one. Weather Scraper, so that should pop up there. Lovely. And then we're going to want a nice background image. So let's go to unsplash.com and see what we can find. Let's have a look. We're looking for something sort of fairly plain and simple. And maybe a little bit weathery. Not quite there yet, I don't think. That's not too bad. Let's keep looking. one we've seen before. That's pretty good. It's got the boots at the bottom. Oh, this one. That looks good. Pretty relevant to weather, but not too much distraction in the background. Great. So let's download that. So I'm just going to control click or right click and save image as. And I'm going to save it in the PHP folder on my hard drive, and I'll just call it background. There we go. So that's saved. Remember though that we're working on the server, so I need to go back over to Firefox and FireFTP, refresh, find my background.jpg file, and then upload it. But just before we upload that, if we just check, it is 3 megabytes, 3000 kilobytes, which is pretty big for a photo on the web. So let's just resize it. Yeah, 4 megabytes in fact. So again, we can do that pretty easily on a Mac in Preview. In Windows, you can use the photo editor. I'm just going to go to Tools and Adjust Size. And then, yeah, we don't need anywhere near 7,000 pixels. So let's bring it down to 2,000. That's already plenty of pixels for us. And then I'm just going to save that as it is. Okay. And then let's jump up back over to FireFTP, and we can see, yeah, now 300 kilobytes, a lot more reasonable. There we go. Right, so we've now uploaded that to the server, so we should be able to access it in our script. Let's do that. So I'll just do a quick check straight off. Image src equals, and we should be able to use background.jpg just to make sure, as usual, that everything's connected up right. And there we go. So you can see it's definitely plenty big enough. You might even want to go a bit smaller than that on a live site, but this will do for a test. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we wanted a full screen, but not stretched out background. That's something that we haven't done before. So let's have a Google and see if we can figure out how to do it. So something like HTML full page background. That'll do. Perfect full page background image. Fantastic. That sounds great. So we've got a nice new methods. Yep, so we want a full page background. Brilliant. A bit of CSS3. Another advantage of doing this is that you learn some new techniques as well. Okay, so let's put in some internal styles. There we go. So it's actually just the HTML element that we're going to be editing here. And all I should need to change there is the file name. So it's now background.jpg. All right, let's have a look. I'll just get rid of that image. Down here, and we'll get rid of Hello World as well. Wonderful. So that looks really nice. It's perfectly sized to our screen, and it doesn't look badly stretched. All right, it's going well. Let's start adding some content. So I'm going to put everything inside a container div. And I'm going to start with an H1, which will say, what's the weather? So let's have a little look at that. Okay, not bad. But firstly, I want it to be centered, and I definitely don't want it to have a white background. So let's set the background of body, which remember will set the background of everything within it as well, to none. And that then should get rid of this problem. Great, so now everything is going to be on top of our nice background image. And let's see if I can center everything in container using text align is center. Great. All looking good so far. Let's just move that down a little bit. We'll give it a margin top of 200 pixels. Great. Okay, that's fine for now. We may want to play around a bit with the positioning when we've got the rest of our content in, but that will do for now. So underneath what's the weather, let's have a paragraph tag, enter the name of a city. And then we'll have our form. So as we're adding a Bootstrap component, always good to get the code direct from Bootstrap, otherwise we're likely to forget something important. Not that our form is going to be particularly complicated, but in fact, yeah, let's just take the default form. We can get rid of what we don't need. Okay, great. So all we actually want is that first input and the submit button. And in fact, we could put this as a label. We'll see if that works out for us. So this is going to be a label for city. The type is going to be text, not email. The ID is going to be city. And the placeholder will put e.g. London, comma, Tokyo to give them an idea of what we're after. And we're not worried about sharing our email address here. So let's take a look. Okay, nice, but a bit too wide there, I think. Looks a little bit ridiculous. So let's limit that. In fact, we can just limit the width of our container. Let's try something like 350 pixels. A little narrow. 400 pixels. Still too narrow. 450. There we go. That looks better. So we're looking good. If I enter a city name, however, it doesn't actually submit through, as you can see there. And why is that? It's because we're missing a name for our input. So we'll have a name of city as well. So now if we put London in there, we get London in our URL at the top. Great. I would like to just spread things out a little bit. So I think I'll add a bit of styling for my input, which will give it a margin of, let's say, 20 pixels on the top and bottom. We don't need any margin on the left or right. It should spread things out a little bit more nicely. Great. I'm happy with that. So now the fun bit. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to use a website called weather-forecast.com. Here we go, and let's go for the weather forecast for London. So as I mentioned, what we want is to extract this forecast here. So for now, let's not worry about letting the user search, but we'll just get the London weather every time. And let's get the contents of this page and take a look at it so that we can work out how to extract what we need. Okay, so we're going to do this at the very top of our script. And we'll do this if someone has requested a city. Then we'll set up a forecast page. And this is going to be file get contents. And the file that we want to get the contents of is that one. And for now, we'll just echo forecast page to make sure that we've got it and to see what the code is. Okay, did I write something wrong? Yes, I did. I spelt it wrong in the first place. There we go. Those warnings are really handy. Great. So we've got our code. It's kind of mixing weirdly with our page now. But let's have a look at the source. So I'm going to use Command-Alt-U. You can also right-click and view source. And then if you want to find the bit that you're interested in, we want the weather forecast summary. So I'm going to use Command-F or Control-F on Windows. And we want weather forecast summary. Let's have a look. Okay, so this is what we want. We want to extract that bit there. So we want to get rid of everything before this selected part, and we want to get rid of everything after as well. As I mentioned, that's something that we haven't done yet, so let's think of a sensible thing to Google to figure out how to do it. Remember, the HTML is just a string, and what we're trying to do is split it up. So let's see if we can get anything as a result for PHP and split up string. Split a string by a string. That sounds pretty perfect to us. Let's have a look. So the explode function, it's even got a cool name. I always like to scroll straight down to an example because that makes it a lot clearer. Aha, so it looks like with the explode function, I can put in a string and then another string, and it will split up that string into an array by whatever I put in the first string. So that seems pretty perfect. Let's take a look. So the bit before what we want to get rid of is that bit there. Now that looks a bit generic to me. So I think that might appear in the page more than once. So I'm going to select more than that. I suspect this bit will only appear in the page once. So I'm just going to copy that and just do a search for it as well. Oh, it actually appears several times. So no, that's no good. I need to select a bit more. So London's going to change because we're not always going to be looking for London. So let's select up to 3-day weather forecast. Surely that will only appear once. It does. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to explode the string using this as our mini string to explode it with, and then an array where the 0th item is everything before what we want, and the first item is starting with what we want, and then the rest of the page, which we'll need to get rid of later on. All right, let's give that a try then. So we want to create, let's call it a page array. And this is going to be explode. And then we want to explode it by that string there. Notice I've used single quotes there because there are some double quotes in the string itself. So it makes life easier. I don't have to escape them. And then the thing that we want to explode is forecast page. All right. So now if we have a look at page array 1, it should start with exactly the code that we want. And there we go. You see we've got some weirdness down there, which we're going to get rid of now, but it does start exactly where we want it to. Great. So we're getting there. Let's now have a look at the beginning of the part that we want to get rid of. And that is this end of span here. So 3 span closes. I don't need to be so careful about whether that appears multiple times in the page anymore, because all I want to do is get rid of the first one. We don't really care what happens further on down here. So we need to do another explode. So let's have a second page array. And this is going to be explode again. And we're going to explode it by that little string. And the thing that we want to explode is page array 1. All right, now then, second page array 0 should be exactly the code that we want. There it is. Wonderful. Perfect. So all we need to do is put that in our output and display it nicely to the user. And let's give it a nicer variable name as well. So I'll just call it weather. Weather is equal to that. And then we're going to display the weather underneath the submit button down here. So we're going to need a div to do that. So we'll have ID is equal to weather. And then we can just put some PHP right in there to say if we have some weather, then we want to display the weather, and we're going to do that with a nice Bootstrap alert as well, so it looks pretty. So let's have a success alert. Again, I'm using single quotes so that I don't have to worry about any double quotes in the string itself. And then we just want to put the weather right in there. So let's have a look. It hasn't displayed that nicely for me. Not a problem. We can just append it to the rest of the string. There we go. Okay, that's good. I think we definitely want to move everything up a little bit. So let's change the margin top to 100 pixels. And also I want a bit of a margin there between the button and the alert. So let's style our weather alert. Just checking, yep, I called it weather. Give it a margin top of 15 pixels. Great. So that looks good. Let's see if we can change our code to work with any city name. So first off, let's try just replacing London with the city that was entered by the user, which is the get array and then city. So if I now put Tokyo in there, we get the weather for Tokyo. Wonderful. Let's just play around and see what happens. What if I put a capital T for Tokyo? Does that mess things up? Nope, it still works. Great. One of the cities that we did think we might have an issue with, though, is San Francisco, because it's got a space in it. And then things go horribly wrong. So we get a nasty 404 error, but we should be able to fix that quite easily by just removing all the spaces in the string, as we saw at the beginning of the video. Because, let's just remind ourselves why that should work. So if we search for San Francisco, then you can see it puts in a hyphen there, but we don't even need to do that because if we remove the space, it'll put the hyphen in for us. So all we need to do is remove the spaces from our string. Got to be an easy way to do that. Let's have a Google. PHP remove spaces from string. Here we go. How to strip out all spaces from a string. And here we go. Oh, yep. So we've got str_replace, and it replaces anything that we put in there with whatever we put in there. So if we want to remove something, we just put that in there and then nothing in the second. And that looks perfect for us. So we can change the get variable itself. So we want to replace spaces with nothing in the get array city. Okay, let's have a look now. So if I now put San Francisco in there and submit, it works great. Fantastic. What if I put a city in here that doesn't exist? Let's see what happens there. We get a nasty error message. So ideally we want to do two things. We want to stop that warning coming, and we want to let the user know that their search for that particular city hasn't worked. It might also be worth keeping the user's city in the input here as well, so that they can see what they searched for. So let's do that last bit first. It's actually quite straightforward. All we need to do is set a value attribute for the input, and then with our PHP, we just echo the city. There we go. So that should work fine. I've just realized though that that's going to remove the spaces from it, which will look a bit weird for the user. So let's use a city variable up here, and then we'll leave the get array unchanged. So let's just check that. Excellent. And if I put something like that in there, it doesn't strip out the spaces for the input. Great. It'd be nice to not have these nasty warnings though. So to do that, we'd need to check whether or not this page actually exists. So let's see if we can do that in PHP. Something like that. Check if URL exists. Perfect. And here we go. This looks pretty perfect. So we're getting the file headers and we're checking to see whether they are equal to a 404 not found error. Brilliant. That looks like exactly what we want. So let's try that out. So once we're there, we'll check this. So we want to get the URL up here. There we go. And if the file headers are 404 not found, then we want to give the user an error. Otherwise, we'll do that. So first off, that should get rid of the nasty warnings at the top of the page there. Excellent. Although we do have a warning down here now. Not a problem. So let's set weather to be an empty string at the very beginning. There we go. And then we lose that error there. So this is great, but we're not showing the user that anything's gone wrong here. So let's say if the file headers are a 404, then let's have an error string. Something like that city could not be found. Okay. And we'll put our error string up there, and initially it's going to be empty. And we'll do this here in a very similar way. So if there's some weather, then we'll display the weather. If there's an error, then we'll display the error, but this time with a danger alert. So it's nice and red and scary. All right, let's give that a go. Excellent. Looking great. So this is pretty perfect. The one thing I do want to check for is the possibility that even though we could find that page, we still couldn't extract the weather. And that's certainly not impossible. If the page we're getting our data from changes its HTML, which it could well do, then that will break our script. And we'd like to have a friendly error message if that happens rather than some nasty warning. So let's have a couple of checks in place for this. And I'll just expand a little so that we can see it all going on. So for this to work, we need to have page array being an array with at least 2 items in it. So we can check to see if size of page array is greater than 1, because it will always have at least one thing in it, because if this is not there at all, then it will just return the whole string. So if it is greater than 1, that means that something's going well. So we'll carry on. If it's not, then we've got an error. So we'll just have the same error as before. That city could not be found. And then we'll do the same thing here. Once we get the second page array, we'll do a check to see if size of second page array is greater than 1. Then we want to set the weather equal to that. If it's not, then something's gone wrong. So again, let's give that error message. Great. Now we can't actually make that happen. Whoops, I've got a nasty error there. On line 23, what have I done? Oh, yeah, there we go. I haven't put brackets around page array. Oh, and I haven't even closed my brackets in the second if statement as well. Not my finest hour, but there we go. Great, so as I was saying, we can't test that because all of our cities should either fully work or not work at all. But let's just have a working one. So Paris looks great. And then we can simulate if we got, so if they changed 3-day to 4-day, then we get a nice error message now. Whereas before we would have got some nasty warnings and then just no output. So when you're using other sites in this way, you need to be very careful because they could change their HTML at any time and you want your app to not break, or at least if it does break, to break in a nice user-friendly way. Great. So once again, congratulations on making it to the end of the PHP section of the Complete Web Developer course. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you managed to make at least most of the weather scraper by yourself. We now have just one piece left of the web developer puzzle, and that is storing changing user data online. And for that, we use databases, and the most popular database used in web development today is MySQL. And that's what we're going to be looking at in the next section. And just before I leave you, there is one more thing I'd like to point out, that we do get a warning with the code in its current form. And we get that if we don't enter a city name at all. And that's because we're checking here to see if the get array has a city variable, but we need to check that in a different way to avoid getting a warning here. Remember, we won't get this warning if we were running on a live site because we would switch off PHP warnings. But it's always nice when we're developing to avoid warnings wherever we can. So let's see if there's a better way to check if an array has a certain key. There we go. Checks if the given key or index exists in the array. Array underscore key exists. Perfect. Okay, so that's what we want. So let's just replace that. So we're checking the get array for the key city. All right, so let's just run that again and make sure we no longer get that warning. Let's just put a test in. City can't be found. Tokyo again. And we get our weather. And just to be absolutely sure, get rid of the city, reload the page. And we do get one notice down there in the input. So we'll need to do a quick check again to see if the city key exists. And we'll do that here. Give ourselves a bit of room. So if the key exists, then we'll display whatever it is. Just bring that back in. Okay. Just check that, and now, excellent. We get our placeholder and we can still put in London and get the weather. There you go. Hope that helps if you were confused by that warning. Now on to MySQL.